are not safe in child protective services, and they won't give them back to their loving families because they're making money.
This is a legal system that you're going into. And if you don't know the rules, you will be chewed up and spit out.
If I could say anything to a mother who just got their children detained, you're in a crisis. Yeah. Life feels like it's over. The most important thing is regaining custody of your children.
The child welfare system at its core is designed to protect children who need protection, okay? And that's key, is who need protection.
So social workers, out of fear, will remove more children rather than only remove those children that truly need to be removed.
It's okay. It's okay.
This isn't someone stole your car. Someone broke into your house. This is someone took your child, your flesh and blood.
It doesn't say on this order that it was not proven. It says untrue. True. I immediately knew that, okay, well, this ain't over.
Were there signs there? Were there no signs? Did I miss them? Did I catch them? At this point, I honestly don't know.
Families only get a finite amount of time to reunify.
I came into this field to help families, not destroy them.
The difference between the criminal system and the child welfare system is substantial. You have more rights as a criminal than you do as a parent.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Fight CPS, the Civil Rights Struggle. I am your host, Amanda Cisco. It is the end of this school semester, and it shows, so I apologize for that. But our guest, we will not be having a guest tonight. Hello, Elena, how are you? And yes, they are absolutely kidnapping our kids for financial incentive, and it needs to stop. But there have been a lot of new laws coming out giving parents more rights. In one state, they just passed a law that if they're trying to terminate, and I believe this was Arizona, and I spoke with one of the legislators. Perhaps I'll have them on the show sometime. But Arizona just passed a new law that before they can terminate your rights, they must have a jury trial. Like, a parent has to have a jury trial, and all the jurors have to agree that the child has to be, terminated from your rights. So that's it. That's definitely a step in the right direction. You don't have just one person making these, permanently life-changing decisions over you and your kids. So I pulled up a link. I will have our producer post it so you guys can follow along. Just give me a moment. My computer's been very slow today. Okay. So this is basically going to kind of walk you through the process of how to deal with CPS once a case is open. Unfortunately, most of you guys who are watching the show, your case has already been open, and it's kind of a little bit too late at this point. Let's see, Maggie, that's not what happened to me. When did that happen? I just had my case in March. Maggie, what do you mean that's not what happened? The jury trial? Because everybody, like, every case has the right to a jury trial, but you have to demand a jury trial at the very beginning of the case. So that's something that you would want to sit down with your attorney and talk to them about. Here. Let's see. All right. Okay, so let me just go ahead and get these out. Okay. Okay, so we're going to pull that up now. So your rights with CPS. So Child Protective Services, also known as CPS, is required by law to investigate reports of child abuse or neglect. They are part of so this is based in New Jersey. They are part of the New Jersey Department of Family and Protective Services, a state agency. So the report, it is illegal not to report child abuse if it is suspected. Doctors, lawyers, and therapists are required by law to make a report if they think a child is being abused. Whoever makes this report will remain anonymous by law. So, taking the children. Child Protective Services can legally take your children. If a report is made and CPS determines that a child is in danger, they have the right to remove them from that situation and any unsafe environment. Unsafe environment includes use of illegal drugs in the house, a home with not enough food or health care, firearms being left open in a home, physical violence happening to the child, or sexual contact with the child. So after removal, parents will be notified in writing by CPS, and they will provide all papers that support the removal field filed with court. All papers include a statement about the reasons of removal by the investigator. 14 days later, a court hearing will be held. The judge decides whether the child should be returned to the home, stay with a family member, or remain in CPS custody at the hearing. The judge can also order various counseling activities for parents or caregivers, such as attending parenting classes, completing an anger management course, going through drug alcohol rehabilitation program, and other requirements. So as far as the service plan, to allow the child to be returned home, a service plan is written with CPS recommendations and steps that must be taken. So it's not a court order and cannot be enforced, but failure to follow the plan can be used against the family that they are not cooperating. At meetings between CPS and family members, the plan can be changed or renewed. So let's talk about your rights. All right, and then we have the link down here. You have the right to talk to your caseworker. Remember that communications between you and the caseworker are not confidential and can be used in court. You have the right to a court-appointed attorney if CPS files a lawsuit against you. You can deny any allegations made by the CPS. You have the right to attend all court hearings about your case. If you do not know English, you have the right to an interpreter. You have the right to bring your child home after the service plan expired unless the service plan is renewed or there's a court order signed by a judge saying that you can't. So as far as the case length, 18 months from the child's removal is the longest amount of time the case will stay open. If a lawsuit isn't started by CPS to terminate parental rights by 18 months, the case automatically closes. It is a good idea to get written confirmation that the case is closed before you take your child back. The person your child has been living with can file custody or get child support from you after 6 months. So it's important to act quickly. So that was that link right there. This was very basic. This was very general. It was written by, a CPS attorney. What frustrates me is that, nobody is talking about, well, I feel like not enough people. And if you're a CPS attorney, or a family law attorney, you know how deep these issues are. You know how bad they are. So why is this person not talking about how to protect yourself when they violate those laws, when they violate your rights? And I hope I start seeing more of that, more people speaking out about like the horrendous things that these people are doing to our families. So the next link that we're going to pull up is written by a blog called Mother Jones. And she's asking the question, the big feature on here is, do we need to abolish child protective services? So, it's inside one parent's 5-year battle with the family destruction system. So she calls it. Okay. So basically it starts off on a steamy Saturday in late June. Joyce McMillan stood outside the Brooklyn family court wearing a t-shirt that had "Truth Over Tradition" emblazoned across the front. A crowd of about 200 people gathered for the first ever March for Black Families Matter. Compared with the gigantic crowds that had taken over the streets of Brooklyn a few weeks before in the wake of George Floyd's killing, this group of protesters was small, but the intensity of their rage at what they viewed as racist and punitive system of justice this time focused on the Administration for Children's Services in New York City, was the same. Stop policing Black families, one of the signs read. Others charged acts steals Black babies, ACS police, and ACS destroys Black families. People who tend to think that ACS/CPS supports families, and they don't. McMillan told the crowd as participants cheered in agreement. Any system built to actually protect children should in no way mimic a system that tortures adults. Whoa, that's big time facts right there. Any system built to actually protect children should in no way mimic a system that tortures adults. Amen to that. And it's torturing our kids too. McMillan knows what it looks like when ACS steps in to offer support. She's a Black mother, and one day in 1999, an ACS caseworker appeared at her door because someone had alleged she wasn't caring for her children properly. Thus began a 20-year struggle, with McMillan defending her parental rights in order to keep her 2 daughters in her care. Building on her intimate knowledge of ACS's bureaucracy, hard-won through personal experience, McMillan now helps other parents fight the system. From 2016 to 2018, McMillan was the program director for New York City's Child Welfare Organizing Project, a nonprofit that was funded by a contract with ACS. In 2018, McMillan left CWOP, and a coalition of parents and social workers, some of whom had once worked for ACS, created the Parent Legislative Action Network to work toward abolishing Child Protective Services' harmful practices. Less than 15% of children are in foster care for physical abuse, says McMillan, citing stats from monthly ACS reports. When I say we need to abolish ACS, I mean we need to abolish ACS needlessly removing children. We shouldn't be traumatizing families, children, and communities. There are, of course, incidents of terrible child abuse, and it's the mission of ACS and child welfare agencies across the country to intervene. But often the child is not in danger, and the caseworker has made a judgment call based on the way the family is living. With the vast majority of parents who have had children in the foster system, their children are not there because they've done something abusive or harmful or abandoned them, says Emma Kenneringham of the Mapping Attorney of Family Defense Practice at the Bronx Defenders, a public defender for a nonprofit. They are there because of related stressors to poverty. And that's, you know what, that's a major issue that she's also addressing that no one's really talking about. And this article is kind of long. I'll leave it on the page. I'll post it on the page after. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next, item. But she's absolutely right. There are a lot of stressors that are attached to poverty. And I don't think it's just a racist system. I think it's a classist system. And they are, we are literally stealing from our poor to feed the rich. And we have the audacity to call ourselves a noble country. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it just makes me sick that we have decided, and we have been for decades, to attack the most innocent members of our population, and that's our kids. It's coming up on a year to date since I've had any communication or updates from my children. The people on this case are just, it's disgusting. It's disgusting what they're doing. They're playing all these games, and I just can't help but wonder, where do you find these people from? What made you look at your life and decide, you know what, I'm just going to be a horribly corrupt, civil servant and traumatize families for no reason other than I don't like them. It makes me so sick. So in this article, this is by the Imprint. When a young pregnant mom informed her parental care providers that she had smoked marijuana to relieve stress, nausea, and poor appetite, they didn't seem concerned. But after the birth of her son a few years ago in a Bronx hospital, a test of the baby's urine came back positive for cannabis, and the hospital quickly called child welfare authorities. They presented her with an ultimatum: enter a residential drug treatment program with your 2 children or lose them to foster care. An account of this New York mother's experience included the recently released report of how the foster system has become ground zero for the U.S. drug war. Describes how she opted for the residential treatment. The woman, identified minimally as Miss CS to protect her identity, was unable in her heart of hearts to be separated from her infant, but the cost was still significant. She had to sign over her public benefits soon found herself scrubbing facility floors as part of her treatment program. Child Protective Services continued to supervise Miss CS after she left the treatment before her case was eventually closed without ever being reviewed by a judge. Oh gosh. 2 years of entanglement with the city's child welfare agency derailed her career and school plans. Miss CS told authors of the 174-page report by the Movement for Family Power, the Drug Policy Alliance, and the New York University's Family Defense Clinic. They don't ask, "What can I do for you?" she said. Instead, they tell you what you should do. The study, released last month, includes Miss CS's story along with other women's anguished accounts of being penalized shortly after giving birth. And you know what? I'm going to pause. That is something that I absolutely disagree with, how we are doing these things. And when you give birth in a hospital, and they don't tell you this, they secretly drug test you and your child when you're in labor, like as soon as you give birth. And you know, it's like they're literally on a fishing expedition to see if there's a way that they can steal your child. And it's horrible. And you know, if you have, God forbid, an open CPS case and you're pregnant, you can almost guarantee that if you give birth in a hospital, they're going to take your child, you know. And some people considering crossing state lines, they'll still find you, you know, or having a birth at home. They can, you know, they could try to take the child away just for that. And that is so wrong. That is so wrong. So the authors describe government interventions in families as too often unjustified and not authorized by existing law. And that's true. Calling such actions an extension of the nation's failed drug war. They also claim 4 in 5 child neglect or abuse cases include a parental drug use as a factor, but often with little corroboration of an addiction. This is one of the greatest injustices of our time and one of the most overlooked. And she's right about that. Says Lisa Singwa, a recent Soros Justice Fellow and former staff attorney at the National Advocates for Pregnant Women, who co-founded the Movement for Family Power in 2018. The child welfare system, contrary to public perception, has a vast and unparalleled government powers, and her group's report concludes with wide latitude to survey and control families and remove children, particularly those from low-income Black, Latino, and American Indian communities. And yes, that is true. Yet it receives far too little critical analysis when compared to the criminal legal system, immigration system, or anti-terrorism enforcement. But literally, like, this is the definition of domestic terrorism. Like, what we're doing to our families literally is the definition of domestic terrorism. These people are terrorists. So before launching the Movement for Family Power, Sangwa and co-founder Aaron Miles Cloud both represented low-income parents in child welfare cases. Miles Cloud is a supervising attorney with Bronx Defenders, involved in more than 1,000 parents' cases for roughly a decade. They describe their mission as working to end the foster system's policing and punishment of families and to create a world where the dignity and integrity of all families is valued and supported. Amen. The group's work involves supporting and connecting like-minded advocates, litigators, and system-affected parents, and steering philanthropic funding toward community-based efforts to heal families and keep them together. There is a deep, deep stigma around whether or not you're a good parent, Miles Cloud said. We need a concerted effort to decrease that isolation to support people resisting that narrative. Although the research on drug-related investigations of newborn mothers began well before police killed George Floyd in Minneapolis, sparking nationwide protests against racial injustice and calls to defund the police, the pair are seeking to seize this historic moment of change and unrest in the nation to broaden the public's awareness of foster care, a system they think needs abolishing, not simply reforming. I agree. More than 1,700 people across the country tuned into a June 23rd webinar discussing the findings of the Ground Zero report. Some scholars and advocates have long called for an overhaul of the broad discretion of child welfare agencies to separate families who are disproportionately Black, Latino, and American Indian. Now inspired by months of protest against racism and police brutality, Those once isolated voices appear to be coalescing and calling for a fast-paced change. I'm inspired by calls to defund the police. I'm concerned by recommendations to transfer money, resources, and authority from police to the health and human service agencies that handle all the child protective services. Dorothy Roberts, the influential author and professor of law and sociology at the University of Pennsylvania, wrote in a June co-op-ed for the imprint. Okay, if I read this correctly, she's basically saying like all of the money that they defunded from the police is now being put into the Department of Health and Human Services. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing, guys. Giving child welfare authorities more money and power will result in even more state surveillance and control of Black communities, Roberts stated. Residents of Black neighborhoods live in fear of state agents entering their homes, interrogating them, and taking their children as much as they fear police harassing them in the streets. Absolutely. There have been similar calls in at least one public demonstration, albeit tiny in participant numbers when contrasted with the millions of people who have railed in support of the Black Lives Matter movement in recent weeks. On June 20th, a parent-led protest of roughly 100 people marched up Lower Manhattan to protest racism in the child welfare system, chanting, "No justice, no peace. ACS is the police." The group crossed the Brooklyn Bridge on their way to the city's temporary intake dorm for children who have just entered foster care. In response to a request for comment on the recent protests and the Movement for Family Powers report, Samuel Chafee, a spokesperson with the city's Administrator for Children's Services, said the city agency is aggressively implementing a racial equity action plan. Chafee also highlighted the agency's redesigned prevention programs to help address racial disparities in service access and called for mandated child abuse and neglect reporters, such as teachers or nurses, to receive implicit bias training. How about we just stop stealing our kids? It's true that there are racial disparities in child welfare, not just in New York, but across the country. And the Administration for Children's Services is acknowledging and addressing them, he says in an email. He recommended better training for mandated reporters so that their accounts are objective and result in help for children who truly need it. Nationally, the Movement for Family Power is the only organization impatient with the incremental reform efforts. On June 22nd, the University of Houston and the Center for the Study of Social Policy in Washington, D.C. announced the launch of a campaign called #UpEnd, which seeks to end forcible separation of children from their families. Alan Dettlaff, dean of the university's Graduate School of Social Work, said the campaign planning predated the recent nationwide protests, but is now a well-timed culmination of years of work to correct the stubbornly high numbers of children of color in foster care. According to the National Center for Juvenile Justice, Black children and American Indian youth in particular are significantly overrepresented in foster care in many states. But local governments' efforts to address those skews have made little progress over the past decade, due in part to a heated debate about whether disproportionality is a result of racism in the child welfare system or rates of poverty. As a result, he added, parents' voices in qualifying studies describing explicit racism parents encountered in the system are discounted. So when people of color tell us about their experiences of racism, we need to believe them and do something about it, he said, who previously worked as a child abuse and neglect investigator in Texas. His thinking has also been shaped by his own experience separating hundreds of families. Never did one of the children I removed tell me later, "Thank you so much for removing me from my horrible abusive parent." When you would go back to see those children, all they wanted to know is when they could get to go home. Absolutely. No shit. That's their family. He and many parent advocates say family separation in the foster care system should be viewed with the same skepticism as many in the public view of the breakup of families by immigration officials. And I remember when I was in one of my pre-law classes a couple semesters ago, she the professor was talking about, and you could tell like she was emotionally invested in this. Oh wow, I just started dumping rain outside. Okay. And I could tell when she was speaking that she was very upset about, the current situation with children at the border. And I immediately got upset and I said, okay, well, what about the children being stolen from our own backyard? It's happening to your neighbors. It's happening to your friends. It's happening to people you work with, people you know. It's a national crisis and it's happening everywhere. And she had nothing to say about it. And it's so disappointing that the people who have the influence and the knowledge and the resources to really, you know, give us the support that we need as families, instead they're avoiding it. They're staying silent. It's almost like they're trying to brush it under the rug, and I don't respect that. I don't respect that. I said in a previous show that you know, as a politician, if you are not addressing this crisis that we as families are going through in this country, I don't need to hear anything else that you have to say. Because the longer we continue to ignore these issues, the worse that they're going to become. You know, we're not even, our courts are so deeply in the habit of doing things that the way that they've been doing them for so long. You know, you try to walk in there and exercise your rights and they laugh you out of the courtroom. That's not okay. So families just aren't believed, says Christy Puckett Williams, the campaign manager for North Carolina's American Civil Liberties Union, and a formerly incarcerated mother who has faced CPS investigations. If you say your child was burned because you were braiding your daughter's hair with synthetic hair, which requires dipping the braids in scalding hot water, if you're a white social worker who's never had braided synthetic hair, you may believe the mom is making that story up. Still, the #Upend campaign, the Movement for Family Power, and other allied groups face a status quo that doesn't weigh as heavily on the nation's history of racism and injustice in evaluations of an individual's child's safety. And this article keeps going. So other groups have also adopted the call, including the Movement for Black Lives, whose policy platform, End the War on Black Women, includes demands Sanguine Miles' cloud health right, eliminate the foster system's power to permanently and irreversibly destroy Black families through termination of parental rights. A pillar of the Movement for Family Power's work is elevating and centering voices of parents who have been scrutinized by the child welfare authorities, but that comes with its own set of challenges. It's still rare, for example, for parents accused of child abuse or neglect to be guaranteed a lawyer in more than a dozen states, let alone be encouraged to advocate publicly for policy change. That's why the June Report Movement for Family Power co-authored includes 6 parents' narratives, including Miss CS in the Bronx. 2 parents also spoke on the group's 23rd June webinar, describing harrowing journeys losing their children due to abuse and neglect allegations. And guys, like, where is their admissible evidence? You're not, in civil court, you have to have a preponderance of not just evidence, but admissible evidence. And, you know, and the burden of proof is on the party who's making the claim against you. But that's not being followed. So Dina Ortiz Adams was among them. She described losing her newborn to the child welfare system before she entered prison 2 decades ago and facing CPS pressure tactics after being discharged. The New York City mother is now a consultant and advocate for parents. The parents that are going through investigations or supervision now with kids under 18, they are deathly afraid to open their mouth. And that's true. That's true. You know, sometimes, like, we'll have guests lined up and at the very last minute they cancel because they're afraid. They're afraid to talk. You know, even me doing these shows and speaking the truth, just speaking simple truths, you know, that's being used against me in my court cases. Like I'm the evil one here. And it's overwhelming, it's frustrating, it's sad, and it's really taking a toll on me. And it, you know, it takes a toll on all of these families. ACLU is a terrible organization, she says. Okay. I don't know too much about the ACLU, but, you know, when you have any kind of like big entity like that, you know, it's not uncommon to have bad apples here and there. But, you know, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the show for tonight, guys. I'll post the links. There was one more, but I'll post it on the page for you guys to see. I've got a couple more chapters from my class I need to read, but you know, just remember, don't give up. Keep fighting. You know, I slowly am trying to come back and find God again. You know, I've been getting together with these people from this really cool Filipino church. And they're really supportive. And, you know, I kind of had a realization yesterday. I have the tendency to, you know, isolate myself when I'm going through something and just not really like, a lot of times I'll get anxiety having to talk to the people around me. But I had this moment yesterday where I realized I was actually talking to my supervisor, Georgette, and we were just rolling. It was awesome. Okay. So I realized that the relationships that we make with the people around us are so important, and there's something to be appreciated and cherished. You know, there are people around you that care about you, you know, and that's love is a beautiful thing. There is so much evil in this world. There's so much evil in this world. You know, anything that we can do to fight against that, you know, be kind to your neighbor, quash any issues with people that may have happened in the past, because life is too short. You know, and we don't need to make this world any uglier than it already is. So I'm going to make more of an effort, you know, going forward to connect with the people in my life who are around me, and just be really genuine and sincere in those connections that I make. And honestly, that's the only way that probably I'm going to get through this. So, you know, open up to the people around you, you know, be genuine, and just, you know, be meaningful. So that's all I have for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Pacific time. That's going to be 9 a.m. Eastern time for Fight With Me Fridays. So we're going to talk about mental health and trauma, coping with our cases. I'll have some cool videos for you guys there as well. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a fantastic night.